Good morning. First, I'm very excited to have wonderful speakers today. We have Dr. Nancy Law, who I will introduce our speakers and give you the flow of the day. And Professor Law is a good friend and colleague of mine at this point. She's a professor at University of Hong Kong, and she's founding director of the Center for Information Technology and Education on the Faculty of Education. She's deputy director for the center. She's started out actually as deputy director for the Center of Information Technology in Education. And she has had some remarkably cutting edge programs that she started, including but not limited to the Digital Citizenship Initiative, which is really quite a wonderful partnership between academics and education. And she's a leader in this field, so I'm very excited that she's going to be our commentator today. So I will introduce Professor Law.
Well, thank you very much, Andrea. Thank you so much for the very kind introduction. And in fact, we've been working over how many years, I forgot now, but I think since I met you in 2013, I thought, in Shanghai in the Science of Learning conference. So that was quite some while ago. And I'm very glad to see sort of hopefully we can have a community of science of learning researchers, which is, I think, much broader than the sort of separate fields that we are used to. And in fact, I think today's speakers actually showcase, the diversity. I mean, each of them are very interdisciplinary, but at the same time, together, they are actually broadening the field, but then we are also having a very good focus. So welcome very much to this seminar on how the design of educational experiences has changed forever thanks to the new digital tools for learning. So it's a very exciting title. And in fact, we have the first speaker, Dr. Tracey Tokuhama-Epinosa, is not new at all because she has actually started the first seminar in this series in May, and this is the second one. I might just say Tracey, okay? So Tracey has a PhD in mind, brain, and education science, which is the intersection between neuroscience, psychology, and education. She is extremely ambitious, I might say. She can't be contained within any one single job. So she's been doing a lot of research and consultancy work for different international organizations such as OECD, UNESCO, ARA, and so on, and also ministries of education. She teaches a course at the Harvard University Extension School called Neuroscience of Learning, an Introduction to Mind, Brain, Health, and Education. She's also the associate editor, one of the associate editors of Nature partner journals on science of learning. She's just published a book on the intersection of mind, brain, and education and digital learning. So she's clearly a very important expert in this area. Our second speaker is Dr. Gen Wei Chang. Gen Wei is an associate professor in the School of Education at the State University of New York at Albany. Dr. Zhang's work is very well known within the learning sciences field, and in particular in relation to computer-supported collaborative learning. His work bridges research and practice, and he works very closely with teachers in schools, as well as educators. Gen Wei collaborated with a team of researchers and educators to innovate not only pedagogy, but also to create technological environments to support those technologies. He has 2 recently funded NSF cyber learning grants. And with that grant, he's been developing a tool called Idea Threat Mapper. I'm hoping that he'll be talking about that, which that is a visual collaboration system. Gen Wei is, well, obviously is also publishing very actively in top journals in the field. And he is currently the co-editor of the Journal of Learning Sciences. And he has quite a number of his publications receiving Best Paper awards. So may I now invite Tracey to start her presentation first?
Thank you so much, Nancy, for that very kind introduction. And if you don't mind, I hope it's not too dizzying for everybody, but I am sharing my screen in a way that the recording will also show you all and the participants that were here. And I just hope that that's not a problem for you. If it is, you can just drag one of those screens off. You don't have to be looking at both things at the same time. So thank you so much, Nancy, but also thank you, Roberto, for making, Roberto Lent in Brazil for making time, Luciano, the chairman of the AERA Special Interest Group on Brain, Neuroscience, and Education. That's wonderful. I see some former students, Kristen, who's in Thailand, and Mirella in Brazil. That's wonderful. And also some old friends from Ecuador. And also, believe it or not, Ku Kahaka Lau in Hawaii is here, by the way. So she definitely, it's a screen off moment for her, but it's wonderful to have you all here. And we hope that you see Michelle and Cynthia, who work with me in Ecuador in Conexiones. They'll be on this on the chat in any event. If there's any questions that come up immediately, ask them immediately, because we know the brain really wants to focus attention. So in order to get your questions answered immediately, that would be the best way to do that. Also, Aubrey, a niece, is here, and Ed, a good friend, a professor in Oklahoma. So happy that you're all joining us. Please consider this an intimate group, and we're going to share the information that we hope is of interest to you. There were not a whole lot of questions that came in during registration. So if it's possible, if you do have questions as we talk, please put them into the chat. Those will be the center of where we want to go with this. So as we begin, I always want to remind people to just go ahead and write things down. We know we have very frail memories. Even a note or two here will help you extend that frail memory. And without good memory and good attention, we're not going to be able to learn anything. So hopefully there'll be some knowledge coming out of this if you do write things down. I also will be asking you in a few minutes to also think about anything you might learn that might be new or different, or reminders of things that you've learned in the past, things that might be of interest, and things that you might even consider changing about your own professional practice based on the information that's shared by Dr. Zhang and myself that might be of use to you in your own professional context. So I was charged with trying to give a quick and comprehensive overview in just a few minutes of guidelines and frameworks and contexts and settings for instructional design. And so, as many of you know who are instructional designers, it's very, very hard to do even in a semester course, but I'm going to begin by sort of talking about the necessity of new skill sets for teachers that include these types of design elements, how and why education continues to evolve. And these will include 4 elements of looking at technology, tools, the learning sciences themselves, and how we can leverage this concept of backward design or understanding by design to shape our thinking about this. Then we're going to be looking at instructional design and writ large, the part of design initially, and then at the end we'll talk about the instructional part, which I do have an issue with that particular word. And then I want to leave you with a worked example in case you want to follow up with the information. So as we begin, just many of you may have heard me speak in the past about this such important change that we're undergoing as teachers. Before, it was enough to know things. You could be a great professor just because you knew stuff, because nobody else knew it. But now we all have phones, and a lot of people know things. So being able to teach then became really a very key element of how we run our teaching professions, if it's K-12 or university, and even more so understanding pedagogical content knowledge, understanding how you teach what it is that you are instructors in. So you might be a great physicist, but if you don't know how to teach, it's really hard to get your message across. So understanding those skill sets is also impossible. But starting around the turn of the century, really around 2001, we changed the teaching model. And we said that people actually have to have technology in their lives. Without this TPAC model, understanding teachers' content and pedagogical knowledge, including technology, we'd kind of be lost as teachers because the technological additions are going to add so much. And then in 2007, with the launch of the field of mind, brain, and education and the first conference, the learning sciences really introduced themselves and inserted themselves into teachers' professional development and training. And so the basic idea here is that understanding all of this within cultural contexts, within the contexts and cultures of schools as well as countries, will make a difference in the quality of your teacher. And this actually changes the profile of teachers into being more like learning scientists. How will that actually work in the future? So the first big idea, and I'm going to share 5 of them with you. The first big idea, if you haven't written anything else yet, write this down. That teachers' new pedagogical content knowledge really includes adding on these 2 pieces of the learning sciences and technology. This was a recommendation we made through the OECD publication in 2017, that all new teachers actually should have that in their teacher formation. And this goes for all modalities. It's not just if you're teaching online. This has to do with face-to-face teaching, as well as 100% online, as well as everything in between, hybrid and all the like of it, okay? So quickly in the chat, I just want to ask if any of you have ever suffered Zoom fatigue. Here's Nancy, who just got off of her 6th meeting of the day. Have you all had Zoom fatigue? Have you ever had a thought, if you were in a conference, that, well, this sounds pretty generic information. It doesn't sound like it's tailored to me. Or have you been in a course that was just bombarding you with tons of dates and facts and formulas and information, but it didn't have anything to do with your own context? Or if you've been in a class that, you had a lot of fun, it was a great time, but, you didn't learn very much. All of those are design questions. Basically, if you want to get away from Zoom fatigue and have engaging classrooms, or if you want to get away from this cookie cutter instruction to do more personalization, or if you want to stray from this pure standards and content towards looking towards mastery, understanding of information, or if you don't just want to come to be entertained and have a nice time in one of these webinars, but you'd actually like to have some kind of significant learning, all of those are questions of design. So hopefully you see the importance of actually understanding some of these newer concepts to put this into focus for us. So technology has changed the how and why. Education has definitely evolved. And I'm going to make this slightly bigger because it's a minuscule graphic at this point. We have always had education run through things like stories, and even before we had formal education begin. But as time went on, we've had contributions from technology. We had film occur, and then we had radios come in, and then even televisions. And once we had those technological advances occur, it actually changed a lot of things related to education by having personal computers introduced in the 70s. There was a new focus, instead of just storytelling, to work on collaborative things, to do more creative productions of things. And then we started to have things like Walkmans. I don't know if any of you are old enough like me to remember a Walkman, but anyways, those began to have personalized, music tracks for individuals. You could tape something for your best friend, right? And this inspired a lot of people in EdTech to think about educational tutorials. And with the advent of the internet, this exploded. So gaming, gamification, and motivated us to think about assistive learning devices. And then also thinking about having your personal phone. That was kind of amazing. And then we had these personal devices. I don't know if any of you guys remember those kind of touch screens there, but then we could now look at analytics about how people are learning. And then we began to think about adapting. How do I adapt this to your particular needs? The iPod, the iPhone, only 2007. Can you imagine? That's only been a few years ago, right? This changed the way we looked at things like apps, the invention of apps to do adaptive learning or personalization of learning. And then we have now things like virtual reality. And these kinds of things are immersive experiences, and 3D technology, which is allowing people to now leverage other types of technology within this balance. And so this pushes us to now think about different kinds of tools. And I'll leave this big because the tools are also a little bit small here. There are many tools that teachers can use these days. There's multi-course platforms. There's also things like software that can check for plagiarism, so teachers don't have to spend their time doing that. Podcasts, like Mirella was telling me, she has different thematic podcasts during the day. Well, they exist in every single field. websites that often are things like repositories of artwork or different types of lessons that are pre-prepared, and apps that can also self-adjust to what the students' needs are. But the biggest field of growth is in gamification. Gamification of learning is changing the way we design our classes and what needs to be done by a teacher in a class and what can be done individually. By students on their own through their own asynchronous time. So if you had all of those different types of tools, how do you know what to choose? And I would like to suggest you can use this filter of the learning sciences. We have had this boom, as we said, right now in technology. So AI has really pushed us to the edge of rethinking instructional design. So if you add on to that information from mind, brain, education science, from cognitive science or cognitive neuroscience, you do get the sense of instructional design sort of in this middle piece. And we're just only beginning. Nancy and I are running a special issue in the Science of Learning Journal that has to look at the impact of that on these other learning sciences. How will the learning sciences be forever changed based on this new focus? And so I just want to close this particular part by pointing out some of the lessons we already have from the learning sciences. We know things, for example, that using cognitive load theory from Sweller and looking at instructional design, how do you design a class? How do you distribute learning moments? How do you design by using colors or hyperlinks or repetitive text in different places or color? How do you design learning so that you reduce cognitive load so that the energy can be used now focused on learning itself? We also have information that about memory systems and attention systems and how doing things like interleaving within your online context or offering frequent low stakes testing enhances memory systems. And so we can incorporate that very easily into our classrooms. The very huge role of emotions in cognition. There is no cognition without emotions. So how is it that you can leverage face-to-face communications with individuals or small group work that would enhance that sense of community? Also metacognitive development, the concept of feed forward. What will you do better the next time, right? Depth of learning through flipping the classroom, as opposed to just having a talking head like me have this exchange. If this had been videotaped, then we could have a discussion around it, right? So can you go deeper with different formats within instructional design? And then also enhancing differentiation and personalization by different structures. For example, differentiated homework that would have bundles that are more personalized and varied rather than a single textbook, which is often out of date these days by the time it reaches the hands of the kids. So this means using different tools, like in a large group session, taking advantage of the disinhibition effect, and then using social contagion. If I could see all of your faces, half of you, I can't see your faces, but the people whose faces I can see, Denise is smiling, and it gives me some kind of feedback that helps me understand how to interact with you. We could use in this classroom breakout rooms to have a more personalized and authentic learning. We can use the chat to have this back channel conversation to get clarification so we can pay attention. We can use tests to have low stakes, frequent testing that would actually enhance memory systems. We can use the discussion boards to create that community, or bundles to differentiate homework so there's different entry points for people. So we know that the second big idea here would be that we have to have technology, we have to use the learning sciences, but my begging request to you is that you let the technology do what it does best so that we can have more time to do what humans do best. Digital tools can tell you what you did wrong, but they don't tell you why you did it wrong, and they don't motivate you to do it right the next time. So if you can let the computer self-correct your quiz, you have more time then for you to be able to talk to that kid and motivate him. So in a quick review of these past 75 years of instructional design research, there are many, many ideas that have come out. And I just would like you to jot down, if you could, accumulatively, what are some of these main elements about how we think people should be taught? Starting back in, 75 years ago, Dale had this famous, cone thing, which is totally debunked and not real. And he never actually really said that, by the way. So neuromyth here, flagging here. But he was the first person to bring to our attention the role of audio or visual support to learning. This kind of got morphed, and somebody cited this wrong, and then somebody else cited that other thing wrong. That publication doesn't even exist, 1969. So anyways, this is not true, but the idea of calling attention to the use of additional tools, not just the teacher teaching one-on-one, but how can we leverage technologies, audiovisual influences on learning. Then we had Bloom talk to us about different levels of ability learning. We had Gange talking, and he was one of the biggest ideas, the biggest people here in instructional design, different conditions under which learning occurs. Florida State University and their ADDIE model is still used today. How do we go through and analyze and design and develop and implement and then evaluate systems? We've also had the introduction of these ideas, especially in science, but now used in all levels of education, of using these 7 E's. Can you elicit prior knowledge, then engage the student, allow them to explore, have them explain. Then you elaborate by improving vocabulary, and then we evaluate to see what they know, and then can we extend that to transferring knowledge. So these different models have existed for a long time. Swiller's ideas were very big on introducing this cognitive load theory. And Merrill talked a lot about authenticity and getting people to do things. Briggs, Leslie, who was a student of Gagne's, also tried to push a more formalized systematic structure of how teaching and learning occurs. And then Keller really reminded us about motivation and emotions, and how being satisfied with what you're doing in a learning context plays a big role in your attention spans there. And then myself, and I was inspired by von Glasserfeld's work looking at radical neuroconstructivism. If we know that all new learning passes through the filter of prior experience, that means what you know already, Mirella, influences what you can know in the future. And this means that there's always this dynamic exchange between what you already know and what you are now learning. This means that if you read the Diary of Anne Frank when you were 12 years old, and then I have you read it again in high school, and then I have you read it again as an adult, you know, the book is the same, but you are not. Your life experiences now change your interaction with that medium. So you're learning differently because of that. So this is another way to think of instruction, that it's always a dynamic and growing position. And then only recently, through the pandemic, we realized how important relationships were, social emotional learning. How we can use time asynchronously and synchronously, and how equity and choice and flexibility and giving feedback play huge roles. And so there's a lot of good writers out there who have summarized instructional design. I personally have my favorite. No, in case anybody's interested in the book, let me know. I'll tell you some more about it afterwards. But the models say something collectively. Oh, thank you, Karen, you're sweet. The models say something to us collectively, which is huge. And that's basically that there are such things as standards. What do we think makes a good class? What do we think makes good learning at both the K-12 as well as at university learning? And there's 10 basic things. One is that it's got a purpose. We know exactly why we are teaching something. The objectives are stated clearly. It also has assumptions. We know what we expect of students coming into the class. We have prerequisite knowledge. Before you start with me, you should know these other things. So the assumptions are made clear to everybody. That there's a clear sequence about what is learned. It's not just a little bit of this and a little bit of that, but there's a logical order to the information that's presented. We also have integrated activities in which there are some passive things like reading, but also very active things like experimenting and rehearsing and using the information, which means a mix of synchronous and asynchronous abilities. Then we have to have good resources. And as we say now, we're getting rid of these standard textbooks and now moving on to at least digital textbooks, but if not, things like bundles, which are mixtures of readings and worksheets and videos and podcasts and use of other platforms to differentiate homework for students. And so gamification ideas. So resources are changing. That application of the information has to be real for the student, and it can be done independently or collaboratively. And that assessment along the way, how am I doing? What can I do better the next time, is continual and ongoing, and that's of the teaching and of the learning at the same time. And that there's time for reflection. We often bombard people, like I'm doing right now, with a ton of ideas, with very little downtime for people to breathe. And it's usually like 24 hours later that they'll have this aha moment about something that was shared. And so do we have the time within our constructs and classrooms to be able to revisit those ideas? There's time for independent as well as directed learning. So this helps create that autonomous learner that we want for the rest of our lives. And then finally, have we found systems of evaluation that measure, product, process, progress along the way? using multidimensional evaluation tools that are available thanks to technology these days. So the next big idea here is that standards and for instructional design do exist, and guidelines totally do exist. There's a lot of them out there, and I'd encourage you all to look at some of those specific guidelines as they're stated there. This is just also to call attention to the last point I was asked to talk about related to context and settings, and that is there's a very big difference between what we did over the pandemic, which was emergency remote learning versus, and that's, I would throw it in the same category as a MOOC. Okay, you just hang something up there and people work on their own. Compared with what we're trying to do today, we have a webinar where we can see individual faces and talk to each other, versus what is a great online course. And I'm talking about constructing a great online course. There's a difference between those different types of modalities as well as settings, okay? So in our class, for example, the course I teach at Harvard, it's called The Neuroscience of Learning, an Introduction to Mind, Brain Health and Education. We have a balance of asynchronous activities. We give quizzes. The people can take the quiz as many times as they want. We don't care. We have them watch a pre-class video. They respond to a discussion board prompt, and then they're invited to explore the bundle and read at least one of them before they come to the live class. And then we come to the live class, and in the live class, then they have the slide deck available. It's recorded. They can go back and revisit it. We have sections to go deeper, and we do workshops on different ideas. And after each of those live sessions, we ask them to reflect. We say, give us a 3-2-1 reflection, like the one I just mentioned to you. And then we have a semester-long project, which they work on. And then they do asynchronous work, which involves a lot of actually redoing information. They can actually do over any of the written assignments because we believe anybody who can learn from their mistakes should be given the opportunity to do so. This makes evaluation a teaching tool. So this is a kind of instructional design that it's really impacting. I'm very happy to say we got over a 4.9 over 5 again this year in Harvard. We tend to get that because students love it. They love this kind of design because they feel that they have advanced in their own learning. So the next big idea is that you have to have a balance between those asynchronous and synchronous learning moments. That's very key. So I would just say that my definition would be that instructional design has clear objectives, that it's got clear evaluation criteria, which is well documented on your learning management system, that it's got a balance of synchronous and asynchronous activities that also takes advantage of prior knowledge, that's authentic and significant to the students, and then it applies great pedagogies, and then it uses tools in the right way possible. This means that if we have good objectives, we decide first, what do I do? Is it asynchronous or synchronous? Should it be online or offline? Should it be taught implicitly or explicitly? And then I choose my tool. So instructional design means making design thinking. It really means thinking with the end in mind. And this means basically, what are my final desired results? How will I evaluate that? And then what do I do? That's the core idea of backward design. So if my objective was just to have factual knowledge, I'm going to have a webinar like this one, where we're just passing on information, right? But if I wanted conceptual knowledge, I'd have to do something in a different kind of a synchronous session. Or if I wanted procedural knowledge, I'd have to have a lot of more asynchronous practice on your part. Or if I wanted to have metacognitive development, I'm really going to have a more flipped classroom with a synchronous meeting time to go deeper into that information. So depending on what your objective is, you will actually have a different format, and instructional design is changed by that. So at a macro level, you can decide a semester planning, or at a meso level, what do I do each topic or week? And then at a micro level, what do I do every single day of my planning? And in the Harvard class, what we did is we have a 15-week semester. We laid out all of the topics that are in each of those weeks. And then for each of those weeks, we break them down into weekly objectives, which each of those, that micro instructional design planning. So instructional design is at that macro level of a long project, as well as at a micro level of each daily planning. Okay, so our typical steps are that we identify the objectives, the topics, the weekly objectives, create the resources, the slides and the videos. Then we have the discussion board prompts, have the students do the quizzes, they come to the live class, and then we evaluate that throughout, and also have this exchange, much deeper exchange during the live class. So that exists. So the last big idea here is that there are worked models, and anybody who would like a tour of the course that we do at Harvard and the way that we do instructional design, you're very welcome to do that. The hyperlink is here, and you can actually watch that video. I'll just leave you with one last word and then turn it over to Dr. Zhang, is that the idea here is instructional design, and all of the things I just mentioned have to do with design. And I just want to put in a little plug for the instruction part. I have a real problem with that word because I think that that's not really what we're supposed to be doing in education. Remember, I talked about this dynamic exchange that should occur between what you know and what you're being presented with. We should go from this instruction where there's somebody, you know, herding you in one direction to a much more dynamic exchange of ideas. And so I would hope that in the future, for all of the other conferences that we end up doing, I hope we can flip it so that then you guys have the time to look at the information and we come together and all we do is listen to you. You don't have to be listening to us. So that would be a goal in future iterations as far as design concepts are concerned, okay? So what did we try to do? We looked at a teacher model that includes technology and neuroscience. I tried to give you a quick review of what technologies exist and how the learning sciences are now playing into that. Using backward design as a general mental planning tool to guide our choices in the different digital educational tools that exist out there. And just tell you, we are a spot in history. I just went through 75 years in about 10 minutes. We're just beginning to understand how humans learn. And I think that this is an exciting time for all of you here as researchers to look at that. We shared a work model, and I hope that you do take the time now to reflect on this. So thank you very much for that. And I hope that there's lots of questions that we can talk about in just a few minutes. Thank you, Nancy.
Thank you very much, Tracy. So we have a very comprehensive introduction to instructional design and all the various sorts of tips for us on how to do it. So 5 big ideas. Can you remember that? Okay. So so now I want to invite Dr. Zhang to talk about knowledge building and his work. It's a very different. There's a lot of design, but it's a very different kind of design. So over to you, Gen Wei.
Okay, thank you, Nancy. So let me share my screen and make sure it works. Can you see my screen now? Yeah. Okay, yeah. So hello everyone, really great to have this opportunity to connect with you all and share some thought on how we can design for student-driven knowledge building. I appreciate listening to Tracy's talk, giving us a nice overview of the important educational changes around us. And my talk will be particularly focused on like how can we design a student-driven collaborative knowledge building process. So the ideas I share are really rooted in the collaborative work I have been conducting with a amazing group of educators in K-12 in the last decade. So I will talk about the particular pedagogy of knowledge building for this new context, and then I begin to focus on some examples of how we can design for student-driven knowledge building. So as Tracy has highlighted, we are standing at a critical point of a social change and education reform. If we look at the world around us, we are really entering a new era of this world, sometimes called a white water world, with constant changes and rapid changes all around us, and giving rise to complex challenges, much more complex than we have encountered in the previous generations. And the whole world is really constantly connected between all the people and different communities. And this trend of change has been intensified by the recent like a pandemic, as well as the major changes like a climate change. So in this whole like a new environment, we really need to consider how we can restructure the environment and really the culture of learning and the living together. So that giving students the opportunity to be more creative, more collaborative, and creating an environment that's more inclusive for learners to restructure their learning and for them to create their own pathways for their future. So the pedagogy and the design I'm going to share are mostly for addressing this need. in the last 2 decades or so, I've been working on a particular pedagogy as my research context. This pedagogy is called knowledge building. And knowledge building pedagogy was first developed by Professor Scott Melia and Breiter at the University of Toronto. And an international network of educators and researchers and technology developers and policymakers have come together to form an international community to look at how we can restructure classrooms and the schools into knowledge building communities. I'm going to highlight some critical features of a knowledge building community. Working as a knowledge building community, students in the classroom build collective knowledge, not only their personal knowledge, but their collective knowledge can become an important leverage to advance their personal learning, growth, and well-being. And they use authentic processes for knowledge creation and collaboration that professional knowledge creation communities use in their daily work. For example, questioning, theorizing, explaining, using evidence to test their ideas, and designing tools and theories, and constantly improving their theories and design over time, leading to new breakthroughs. And they not only do this individually, but collaboratively. They engage in the kind of dialogue that are essential for creative teams called knowledge building discourse. And bringing this kind of knowledge building processes in the classroom really require creating a new culture in the classroom. And at the center of the culture of knowledge building or knowledge creation are a set of principles representing the soul and the core of this kind of classroom operation. I'm going to highlight a few of the principles. One is the principle for giving students the epistemic agency for continually advancing their ideas. I use this visual here, representing the core of the sustained inquiry and knowledge building process. It starts with the questions, the problem we need to know, and then we build the knowledge. But as we build the knowledge, the more we know, the more we realize we need to know. Striving a sustained cycle of creative work that never ends. So how can we really place this sustained cycle of wondering, problem solving, problem finding into the classroom process is the core for creating a knowledge building classroom. The second principle I want to highlight here is called collective knowledge for community, for building or advancing the community's knowledge. Collective responsibility. So in the classroom, everyone is a valuable contributor, making responsible and connected effort to advance the community's knowledge that benefit every learner. As the core of this culture, everyone contribute. And the more I contribute, the more we know, and the better everyone learns. That needs to be translated into the dynamic of a classroom process. So in the knowledge building context, a knowledge building like an inquiry-based unit, they can integrate all kinds of classroom activities, ranging from individual reading to group work, reading books, all self-generated experiment. They improvise to address their question. They bring the information in small group, sometimes meeting with the teacher. And then whole class conversation are plugged in for the student to share the information across area, across groups, and build knowledge together. The information they generated, knowledge they created, and the question they generated in the classroom are posted in the online space for continued online knowledge building conversation. And that's part of the learning and the knowledge work in the larger world, embedded in the real context. So this kind of knowledge building process is really messy and dynamic. It needs to be student-driven and open-ended. So how can we design and support this type of learning in the classroom and somehow make it organized? So I'm going to share some strategy and some thinking here, but the key is really search for a new type of classroom guidance and classroom structure that not only gives some order to the classroom process, but really enhance student agency and embrace classroom fluidity for ever-deepening inquiry processes. I'm going to begin with two metaphors for design. One metaphor, we may think of the design of a public space like a park. And oftentimes the designer created a blueprint and built the planned path, expecting the participant, whoever come into the space, to follow the path, moving from the entry point to the end point to their target. So we built planned paths to guide the participants' movement. But in this kind of space, we oftentimes see that people do not only work on the path, but they take their own paths to their own interesting places. That created so-called social trail or desire lines. And oftentimes the designers or the managers may put up signs, say, do not step on the grass, but oftentimes that doesn't work. So this represents the design of our traditional classroom design for really creating the kind of path of learning for students to follow through, but actually sometimes it doesn't work. The second metaphor I'm going to share with you is called a social trail. So instead of creating the planned path, the designer will create a largely open layout for a public space and invite the people in to use this space. Their spontaneous traffic in this space start to create the social trails. And the designer will work with the social trails to pave the way. That's more adaptive to the user's need. So this is the kind of social trail design that can be used to create more dynamic and spontaneous and flexible complex spaces. So in this talk, I'm going to talk about how we may use the social trail design approach to design collaborative knowledge building in the classroom. So the teacher will open the context, largely open, engage the student in to explore their initial questions and ideas. And then the teacher will work with the student to discover the interest trails of inquiry and co-configure the pathways of learning ahead. That leads to intentional inquiry in the individuals and in the collaborative groups. As they work on their inquiry, that's going to give rise to new questions and new interests and new connections. So this teacher will work with the student to make sense of the idea moves and reorganize the pathways of learning ahead. That created expanded opportunity for further inquiry and collaboration as an iterative process. So I'm going to share with you a brief example. This is a human body inquiry in 4 grade 5 classrooms that lasted several months. The teacher first engaged in open-ended planning for this whole unit. And they understand the big ideas in the curriculum, make sense of the school context, the time available, the resources available for students, and look at what happened in the student past, their learning and their life experiences, and imagine possible journeys ahead, but make it largely open, not work out the detailed sequenced activities and assessment, but really only give enough planning for the kickoff to invite students in. Then the student will engage in a set of kickoff activity using their body part to achieve a challenging task. For example, throw the beanbag into a target area, but keeping eyes closed. While experiencing the amazing functions of the human body, they generate all kinds of questions. They took note of their questions. Then they come into a whole metacognitive meeting, we call a metacognitive meeting in the classroom, to build their pathway together. Individual questions were shared. For example, why does my breathing get faster when I exercise? And that kind of question, a whole bunch of questions like this was shared in the classroom. And they review how their questions are connected so that they can find the shared interest areas. They called our wandering areas. And that the individual questions were posted next to the wandering areas to suggest their personal interests, therefore forming spontaneous groups. So we created a technology for this kind of a co-organized inquiry, and the student can actually add their branches of questions based on the wandering areas on the chart paper, now translated, move on to the technology platform. So there are questions, how do we breathe? How does the heart function, et cetera, were added as branches of inquiry in this space. And the individual student can set an area at their focal area, therefore forming spontaneous group, and they know who is working on which area. And each area automatically become a conversational space. So they work on the collaborative inquiry in that space. So Then students conducted intentional inquiry around and across the different areas, individually and with their groups, with their information, knowledge, and questions posted online in each area. And then as they move along, they realize they have new questions and new interests emerging from their work. And the teacher and student sat together in a circle to have further reflection. For example, how does the body heal? So not only having a healthy body, but look at how body can go wrong and how the body heals itself. That expanded the scope into a new area related to the immune system. And there also productive entanglement of different areas of inquiry. For example, how does the breathing actually affect or connect with digestive system? And how does the brain actually need so much blood? So what's going on as the intersection of the different body system? And also some rise above opportunity for really put knowledge together to answer big questions. They realize it's all about cells. Whichever body system you're working on, it's all about cells. So what are cells? And then for the fifth graders, they have a really interesting question because they are growing so fast in this age. They ask, so how do we actually grow? A question like that is not in a typical science textbook or science curriculum, but they really require students to put their knowledge together and create new opportunities of inquiry. So new wondering areas were added on the ITM, or Idea Thread Mapper, especially for the problem of how do people grow. It requires so much knowledge about the different body system. And the current classroom decided to launch that conversation as a cross-classroom collaboration with the other 3 classrooms at the same school. So they work together, put their knowledge together to understand how do people grow. That require all the different knowledge. We have detailed analysis, look at how the 4 classrooms actually put their threads of ideas together to understand how people grow. Integrating knowledge about not only how bones and muscles grow, but how the brain control and the process of cell mitosis, as well as genetics. So you see that really creating an interesting opportunity for creating a creative mixing of ideas to address larger challenges. So using the example, I've showcased a particular way to design knowledge building for collaborative creative work, working with social trails in the classroom. We call this framework a reflective structuration, which is to allow the structures of the classroom to be generated through a reflective process instead of pre-planned. So I'm going to briefly highlight the implications for teachers and for our lesson designers and curriculum developers. So this particular approach of working with social trails or desire lines in our classroom can really unleash the creative power of learning, especially for inquiry-based interactive and collaborative classrooms. But even for teaching in general, powerful teaching always require creative improvisation. It's not always can pre-plan everything in a perfect way. Traditional classroom design oftentimes focus on clarifying our instructional intention. So we predefine learning or sometimes backward design of what we need to achieve. What's the content should be there? What task should be there? What's the assessment that should go along with it? Nothing wrong with that. It's also very important to have that context and the framework to know what we need to do. But learning really needs to take place in a student-driven manner. We need to unleash student creativity, let their question drive their learning, let their interest drive their conversation, and let learning emerge in a messy way. And then we can work together to shape it in productive directions. So that requires the teachers to shift their focus in the classroom from their intentions to their attentions, to maximize the use of our attention in the classroom and create improvisational opportunities for creative learning. Be attentive of what's going on in the classroom. I don't know what's going on because they are doing things not totally aligned with my plan. That's okay. So I'm going to make sense of what's going on in the classroom. Think about what interests and ideas are emerging in their work. Who is saying what and doing what? And are they making any progress? Or are there any interesting connection they are making? And then we can be imaginative, think about the future, the next step, both for the near term and most possibly for the long term. And we can shape the future paths together so that will really create the kind of adaptive learning environment that's akin to the social trail environment that we create for a city, for a park, for a dynamic collaborative system like our society. So that requires our teacher not only to know what to teach, the what, but really think hard about what if. If I see something, what if I bring two students, share different interests, not putting them together in one group, have a conversation? What if I plug in a new book and see how that may trigger new questions? And what if I really let the student to say, what if you have the next week, I don't know what we should work on, what will you do? So that will be the power of learning that we really can leverage by enhancing the student responsibility for collective knowledge advancement. So I'm going to end here. Look forward to our conversation. If you have questions or want to know like more about Ideas for a Mapper, please visit this website. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Gen Wei. So it's fascinating, isn't it? So would anyone want to be the teacher in that classroom? It's actually quite challenging, isn't it? But I have also seen a lot of cases where if the teacher flips the thinking from being a teacher to a designer of learning experiences. So, I mean, I'm asked I'm given the privilege of being the, giving a few comments. So I'm just going to share a bit of my ideas about how, because this, the theme here is on instructional design, but of course, what is instructional design? Just now, Tracey was also saying that she doesn't like the word instruction because it's a little bit too didactic. So in fact, instructional design started, I think it has a history of just over 1 century. It started, I think, around the First World War, and it was necessitated because of the World War. And I think it was started in the US. Instructional design is very much a US or American term. So because there's so many people who's gone to the war, and you need people to work in the factories. And how do you train these people? So you need to actually, so the focus is very much on giving information and then getting the efficiency of having a lot of people knowing that knowledge very quickly. So the technology was information technology in that sense. It was information focused. And of course, as time goes along, even until the time when we have the computer, the first computer, it was teaching machines. So you have the intelligent tutor teaching people. But of course, as time goes along, and particularly when what is valuable is no longer the information, no longer the knowledge. It's the creation of new knowledge, understanding of the problem, and not being worried or afraid of seeing new problems and working with others to face the challenge. So, and also I think there is also these, so when we talk about the science of learning, we talk about learning. So how do people learn? And so initially the idea was that people learn from resources, from other people. But in fact, a lot of times we are learning with others. So if you think about our academic community, we learn from each other, we learn with each other. And so it's really flipping, the whole process of thinking about learning as an individual thing to actually being a collaborative enterprise That's something you own. And also, people are not machines. So people have feelings. The social emotional aspect of learning is also important. So when we talk about learning design, then we talk about very much the environment and getting, so it's like herding cats, right? So we can't herd cats. So what do? We create environment for the cats to go where we want them to go, ideally. So, and of course, we want to be surprised. And I think the good news is, this kind of learning does happen. And I think it has to happen first with the teachers experiencing the excitement of solving new problems together with others. So, but then also, where is the technology? So we talk about instructional technology. So in the technology that helps the instructors, or it can be the technology that instructs. But I like to think about learning technology. So what do we mean by learning technologies? It's technologies that help people to learn. Well, there are some technologies that are out there that exist that can help us to learn. Say, for example, we use browsers, we use search engines and productivity tools and so on. But there are also some learning processes that would actually benefit us as learners. So if we look at the history of technology to support teaching and learning, then it started by people creating the technology and giving us, so you in education, you can use this technology. But I think we've passed that stage. So we can look at the learning processes and then say, hey, what do we need? How can we support our own learning better? So it's going from the learning theory, going from the pedagogy to put demands on the technology. And I think Dr. Zhang's work on the idea threat mapper is exactly one example of such technologies. So, and also, I think we also need to be thinking about what kind of process would generate such technologies. We have to be working with teachers and learners. So the design of new technologies or learning technologies has to be not separated. So I think, as a researcher, I'm a big, much of my research, not only I do different things, but what I really love to do is what we call design-based implementation research. So we have theories, but actually when we do all these work, working with teachers and learners, we actually learn about much more about children's learning and teachers' learning. And so we can generate new technologies and new theories through working and serving teachers and learners. So having the learner at the center and the teachers supporting the learner, and researchers and technologists, being there to be learning from them and supporting them. So thank you very much for giving me this opportunity to be sharing the stage with two wonderful speakers. Thank you.
Great. Thank you so much, everyone, for participating in today's webinar. We've come to the end of the formal presentation, but really ask that as many of you who can stay on for the next 30 minutes so we can have some dialogue, some discussion around some of these key concepts. Gen Wei, Tracey, Nancy, it's been awesome. I'm a longtime teacher. There's so much here that I am learning and want to follow up on. I think we had a masterclass today. I want to remind everyone that this is a second in a 3-part series. The third part will be coming out, we think early July. We don't have the exact date yet, so please be on the lookout for that third session. I also want to remind you that we are really launching a digital learning and Nancy likes to say technology enhanced learning working group. And that means coming together as a smaller cohort with people who have very specific issues around this concept, to delve deeper into those issues and to really create, you know, all the resources we can, or avenues through which we can get this information disseminated broadly to the teachers who and students who they serve. So I'm excited about today. I look forward to the third part. Again, we're going to open up. There were many, many questions, by the way, that came in and we did not have time. So I have to talk to Tracey mainly, I think, about how we might address some of these questions, and maybe you too, Nancy and Jianwei, how we can actually respond to some of these, because I think there was just a lot going on here in the chat. But again, we want to open up right now just for discussion. If you can stay on, our speakers have agreed to stay on for 30 minutes. And I think it would be a great time for us just to continue to exploring. Again, please be on the lookout for our emails, because we'll be posting this particular webinar on our website, I think, by next week, and all of them are posted there. We've put the website in the chat several times, and I'll make sure I do that one more time before we close. Excited to have you all. Thank you again. Jianwei, I love the phrase, teachers working from attention and not intention. So I'll take that away in my own work, because as educators, personally me, always going into the classroom with our intention, our goals and our objectives. And so I hear you saying we need to pay more attention to the to the dynamics of our students and what they're trying to learn. So I'm going to open it up at this point just to see, first of all, if any of the speakers have any questions to raise or points they want to add. If Andrea, you or Bob.
To call out Andrea, because Andrea from the Slovak Republic, she's also represents one of the United Nations women's groups here in New York, and she's also a teacher at the university. But she's pointing out that Andrea, maybe you can articulate better than I, but I think the larger question you put in the chat has a lot to do with the system is set in one kind of a way. Kids expect one kind of a thing. We're talking about radical change, and sort of where does it stop? Who gets to initiate all of this? Because kids are doing one thing, or students are doing one thing and expecting one thing. Andrea, did you want to elaborate on that a little?
I just would like to add that, you know, like I am using usually the whiteboard, like in the classroom, you know, and I don't see my students, you know, particularly during this part of my lecture. And also when I'm sharing, I don't know, PowerPoints or some videos, or let's say calculator, for example. So I am using basically the whole screen, and I don't see really the response of my students, only in the chats, of course. So, you know, like it is difficult to really follow up what they have really learned and what they didn't. And sometimes they are not very articulated, you know, like it is difficult to really, by the end of the lesson, even though I'm giving them some kind of small quiz, which I don't evaluate, I just want to see, you know, like kind of the feedback from my lesson, what they have really learned. And I just, of course, marked it, they submitted it or they didn't submit it, but, you know, it is difficult to really kind of engage them into the lesson. That's my concern.
You also pointed out this emotional thing of the community that we're so used to. And this is why so many teachers want to go back face to face, is because they feel that it's easier to put their finger on the pulse of where the group is going. I think also Dr. Zhang's fantastic ideas. I'm just wondering if any of those things are possible virtually, or if that's even something we need to think about, or is design really meant to be perfected first in these face-to-face settings, and then what can carry over gets carried over into online. But you raised some very good questions there, as did Ku, about context and Aboriginal experiences in online versus face-to-face as well. So
I'd like to also point out, you know, in terms of Tracey, sorry, just one more adding, and I am really thankful for this lecture because I have learned a lot. I just would like to point out, you know, in terms of my community from, you know, from New York and this community City University of New York. It is also about immigrants, and sometimes they are afraid to share because of their language skills. You know, they are not very confident with their language skills. So sometimes they are quiet. They are not willing to participate and to be engaged because of their language. So how to encourage them, you know, to be more participating, more engaged into the lessons.
I can speak briefly on that. You know, in our work, we actually every year this school has quite a few new immigrant students coming to the classroom. Some of them have okay English; they already can communicate, get to the level of communication. Others may be, you know, very limited, a few words. So we actually in the classroom we paired the science teachers with the ELA, ESL teachers for the science lesson. So they can, sometimes we actually allow the student to write in their own language, whichever they prefer. And then you know, we can use Google Translate to actually get some basic idea of what they want to share because it's posting online. Online platform does give that opportunity, both for the language support and also for the time they need to refine what they want to say. And in the classroom, sometimes we pair the student when they are sitting together. Actually, students become more patient when they realize that they are talking with someone who need more time to put their ideas in word. And sometimes we enjoy it. So I think that really the integration of the different channels really can really support that. And also really say things and convey things that they care about. And even their language is limited, but actually they have so much to contribute. And they can bring their own cultural experience, especially about human body, how different cultures actually are exercising and why that different ways of exercising or work in their ways. So that's make it so interesting. What mean to be healthy? So it's bringing in so many like a different cultural perspective in that. New immigrant student actually start to share their perspective and gain the spotlight, you know, in the classroom, become more central instead of only, you know, someone who need help.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah, actually, I think Angie's question is a very important one, and culture is certainly a key challenge. It's the teacher's culture and also the learner's culture. And I think we need some kind of like an evolutionary process. I think because it's not just the, okay, of course, say for example, in the Eastern cultures, we tend to be much more submissive. We always learn from the teacher, but even outside of that, I mean, we tend to think of learning as from somebody. And so I still remember I was talking to one teacher that was quite some time ago. He was a native English teacher for in Hong Kong. So he's supposed to be helping students to learn English and speak like a native speaker. So he was going into the classroom, he got the students to sort of face each other in groups and to talk to each other. And the students said to him, why do we want to talk to each other? What can I learn from talking to them? We are here to learn from you. So it's a very different kind of culture. So if we were to be changing it, we have to, I mean, to become the kind of classroom that Gen Wei showed us just now, it takes quite some time for the classroom, for the students and for the teachers. But I've also seen teachers taking a small step, just a tiny step. So I don't think my students can do it, but maybe I can try. I'm going to just risk one or two of my lessons. And oftentimes, if the teacher is brave enough to open up a little bit, I still remember, you know, one classroom I was working with, the teacher, so we don't use the term knowledge building, that's a very big word. we just use self-directed learning. We just let the learner have a little bit of, agency. And so I went into the classroom to see it, because the teacher would say, okay, I want people to come in and see how my students learn. And so I went in, I sat there. At the end, I was actually quite unhappy. I thought, it's so didactic. But anyway, at the end, we have a debriefing. And then, I normally sort of get the teachers to say, so the teacher who was teaching to talk first, and then others to talk afterwards. And I would be almost like the last one to talk. And the teacher was teaching. I said, so what do you think of the lesson? Did you achieve what you anticipated? And he was so excited. He said, I didn't expect it's so good. He said, oh, it's so good. He said, did you notice that boy at the end of the room? He asked a question. Well, I was actually sitting next to that table. So I didn't know the student, but he said, it has always, that student was always a troublemaker, is either sleeping or making trouble. And this time he's asking a question. So I thought, okay, let me not be so harsh. Everyone needs to take small steps. And so maybe it's like the social trail. So to actually, so I think it's the kind of like small feedback that might actually help a bit. So I don't know whether there would be more questions or more sharing of observations.
Luciano, you made a really good observation about the definition of design and just how it changes a teacher's perspective of their own job. Did you want to elaborate on that? Because it was a very interesting comment in the chat.
Thank you. Great presentations. Every time I come to one of these, this is my second one. I didn't catch all of the first one, but what I caught was really intriguing. And this is something actually I've been thinking about for a while, because I've tried these approaches in the past and I have mixed results. When I thought there were great results, mixed results from the students, meaning they might not have been ready for it. And this is both at the K through 12 plus also collegiate level. There's an essence of preference from the student. The point that I was making, it was more of a systematic point, but I actually would like to focus more on something you said, Tracey, which was the purpose of the objective. And I think this it's critical because part of what we're talking about is the differentiation between didactic direct instruction and constructivism. And the truth is, what I've been contemplating for a while, and I've been trying to put it together into some form of paper, is that there's a need for the instructional designer to identify, as you mentioned, Tracey, the objective. And objectives are going to lend themselves to different pedagogical approaches. So if you're trying to create, let's take, for example, Bloom's taxonomy. If you're trying to get into the higher levels of Bloom's taxonomy, creativity, for example, you're going to design a class that is more of what Jianwei, Dr. Zhang was talking about. But if you're trying to hit some of the lower levels of Bloom's taxonomy, recall, for example, memorization, there's no need for you to construct that knowledge. You're going to be grounding yourself in more of a didactic approach, because that's a much faster approach to getting to that knowledge acquisition that the students need to have. So I think the revision of Bloom's taxonomy, which offered by Crosswell and I can't remember the other name right now, that offered a new dimension to the work that Bloom had done, requires a third dimension, which is the idea of well, where am I trying to get to, and what's the most efficient pedagogical approach to that? And so it becomes more dynamic rather than, oh, I'm going to argue for one side or I'm going to argue for the other side. It's, well, where am I trying to get to? Sometimes I'm trying to create this organic social paths that we were talking about, but other times we're just saying, hey, come along with me because this is the fastest way. So I don't know what everybody thinks about that, but that's something I've been thinking about for a while, which is I don't like to argue for one or the other. I'm trying to see what is it that I'm trying to get out of it. And sometimes I'm trying to get out, the purpose is to get the students to begin to think for themselves. Other times the purpose is you just need to learn these facts. For me to get the students to construct the multiplication facts on their own would be silly. I just got to tell them and they have to memorize them. So I don't know, that's something I wanted to lay down on the table. What I said on the chat was more of, sometimes teachers are not given the freedom to carry out such work from their institutions or from their departments of education. It got to a point around where I live in Los Angeles where some schools were telling teachers exactly what to say and how to say it. And they would go, and an administrator would have to go from class to class, and one teacher would be in a sentence and the other one would have to be able to finish it, right? And it's just, it got really bad. So, but I love the presentations, and I think this is where we should be going and be thinking like, but it's just a question I have.
I wanted to say that this was exactly what was on this whole point of Bloom's taxonomy, not in a hierarchy, but more a circular idea. But depending on your objective, you do different things. And I guess the design has to be more intentional, is what you're saying, is that we have to be much more conscious of deciding what is that objective. At what level of thinking am I really going to be challenging the students? Is it just, explicit content delivery, or is it something else? So yeah, excellent point. Thanks.
I just want to echo that. I feel like the different pedagogies options are really important. It's not like just using one pedagogical option, but then ultimately it's not only choosing pedagogical method or teaching method. More importantly, it's about learning method. I think if you look at the knowledge building kind of approach, it's not just only learning by discovery. Once you have a problem, for example, how do people grow? You cannot figure out by just looking at your own body and look at the bone muscle, how that becomes stronger. You have to explain it, what's under it. And that requires reading. That requires a knowledge gained from the discipline. So with the whole overarching process being problem-driven and student-centered, all the different methods of learning can come along, be it reading, attending a lecture, and sometimes sharing in a group work, and do experiment. So all the different methods of learning serve the larger purpose, which is to explain and figure out how the world works.
I think that also, Kristen, if you wanted to mention something, she's talking about agency, and I think this gets to the very, very big idea that we're always looking also to nudge people in other non-content skills. So for example, autonomous learners and things like that. So are you talking about an instructional design that sort of weans the learner from a dependency on another to guide this, or that they've developed enough of that metacognitive process to know how to do this themselves? Is that where you're going with your comment, Kristen?
Well, I think I was listening to Luciano and reflecting on my own experiences of thinking that, like, valuing constructivism and thinking that the most respectful way to approach a learner is to allow them to construct everything on their own, and kind of learning it, like Luciano was saying, well, sometimes that doesn't make sense. And sometimes, I find myself saying, it's not disrespectful of a young learner. I'm thinking like early years, elementary age. It's not disrespectful of the learner or the learner process to provide information. Like, there is a place for direct instruction. And actually, like when you set up a wonderful learning engagement, you have to see what their prior knowledge is and make sure they have the knowledge and skills that they need to engage fully with that learning engagement. So that's what I was thinking. And I think I hear agency sometimes being spoken about in a K-12 setting as a synonym for free choice. And I think that a more helpful way to think about it is, do these kids have the knowledge, skills, and understanding of themselves as learners to advocate for themselves? So that means, are we teaching these kids how they learn best, so that when they're approached with something that they need to learn on their own independently, they have a variety of tools that they can pull on to know how they learn best?
Right. Yeah, I mean, I like this discussion, and I think we, of course, would not be just leaving the children to discover the knowledge all the time. That's not the case. But the problem is, if we were teaching, even if we say it's simple information, different students may be finding it different. And also, I think a most important obstacle to learning is the lack of relevance, the lack of motivation. So I think the knowledge building model is attractive in the sense that you kick off. Okay, so if you use the body system or whatever, then of course the teacher is already focusing. The student. You're not just leaving them to run around, whatever you want to learn, but getting them to start thinking about it. And when they ask questions, then we can begin to help them to learn. We can say, well, maybe, if you want to learn this, maybe you can find something. Or what I find to be very useful is, I'll get the students to talk about what they have found. Then I can know what misunderstandings, what misconceptions they have. And then I can begin to grab their attention and then say, so it's not just letting them roam around, but also once we have the social situation, because sometimes the class is, even if it's not a very big class, sometimes the diversity in the students' ability or interest can be quite an obstacle for us to teach. And so getting them to work together and talk about the problems first, they can also begin to help each other, because through the conversation, they can get more understanding. Then we can, so I think still I'm seeing it to be mostly us helping children to point them to the right direction, but they have some freedom. And so it's the freedom which gives them the more of the motivation. And also sometimes it often goes beyond, if they're interested, beyond what we expect them to know as a kind of baseline. But I think it's really, it requires experimentation.
I don't know, Ku, you've made a couple of really good comments. I don't know if you have a microphone or if you're able to talk, because I know it's so early and you might be waking up everybody in your house if you speak right now. But if you wanted to, feel free to jump in.
Thank you very much. Yeah, I don't look quite presentable. It was 4 o'clock when I got up, so excuse me for not showing my face here, but I can talk. The bedrooms are on the other side of the house, so we're all good about that. Yeah, so thank you for just some awesome discussions. I was privileged to teach a class with Tracey called Mind, Brain, and Na'au. And for us, the Na'au is our gut, it's our ancestral knowledge. And so I'm a Hawaiian educator, and those concepts of gut feelings, of spiritual connections with the land that are familial, all of those things are just really different when we're looking at indigenous education. My PhD, I was the first one to get a PhD in indigenous education, and I had to qualify it as a field in 1996 because they said there was no such thing. And now what's happening is we're going into using technology, and so there was nothing to consume, right? When the DOE said use technology, there was nothing. The Spanish teacher could order something, the French teacher, as a Hawaiian language teacher, was nothing to order. And so we pivoted from when technology first was introduced as our students just becoming strictly consumers of the technology to becoming creators of technology, specifically technology about ourselves, which is usually presented from a non-native perspective in general, right? Because that's the people who are writing the books now. Before we used to write our own, but in the last 100 years, it's been science talking about us in one way or another. And so that's this concept of creators of technology. And now, it's about this next step where really online teaching has become a way of life for various reasons. One of them that people just can't show up in the same place at the same time anymore, et cetera, et cetera. And now we're expected to use LMS, learning management systems, and LXPs, learning experience platforms that are strictly developed from a Western perspective. And just like in 1996, I had to prove that Indigenous educations are different, not better or worse, just different from the general Western models, even though more and more we're seeing what I call ancient is modern, that the way our ancestors taught is very much aligned exactly what the latest brain researchers like Tracey are finding out in Harvard. So that's one thing about Indigenous peoples, speaking for myself and for others, that there is this ancient is modern thing. But now, as I said, we're going into these platforms, and they're very linear, they're very sequential, they're very student-centered, right? As far as my success, versus we like to do collaborative success, right? If everybody succeeds, then we succeed. If only we succeed, it's not really a success to us, right? So those kind of things very much also, the dialogue that happens is restricted, even though I know Tracey tries hard to, bring in the discussion boards, but we are more orators, right? So to have, and that takes time, and the synchronous learning, and how can we put those kind of things that are a very important part for us in an in-person situation. How can we transfer those types of experiences, collaborative learning, etc., into platforms that are just not necessarily designed to do that? So that's where, so we are creating an ILXP, an Indigenous Learning Experience platform. We need about $100,000. So if anybody has anything there could help us, or programmers. We have designed the concept already. We just can't find programmers that come from an Indigenous perspective and can help us to create that. But if I put my email into the chat already, if anybody knows anyone, we're working also with MIT. We got an Indigenous Community Fellowship, and that's part of it is creating this ILXP. So we're excited because I think, we're going to be merging, and certainly what was presented today is very much in the direction that we want to come from already as Indigenous educators. So thank you very much, Tracey, and the other presenters. I really learned a lot today.
I think you need to recruit. Aubrey just graduated neuroscience in Maine, looking for a job. I bet she'd come and volunteer in Hawaii for a while if you want some help.
That sounds great.
I don't know if it was Andrea or Winston. Were you going to be, Andrea, you have a lot of also responses on the chat. Yes. And so many good ideas. Did you want to bring in your own contributions, not just listen to others because you're facilitating, but you really have some great ideas yourself?
Oh, no, I was just communicating on the chat also. And I was saying how nice it was to hear some of Ku's commentary, because often in the science of learning, one of the things we say is part of the reason we need to understand learning so we know what not to rip out of the culture, because there were so many things that were built into the culture that are inherently great for learning. And I felt like what Ku was saying is underscoring that. And I thought it was very interesting.
Yeah, and I just wanted to add that with a lot of conversations around science of learning and equity, at least within the US, those two concepts are very much at the tip of our tongue. I thought today's presentation and conversation really helped to bolster pulling those two concepts together, really understanding the science and how it supports equity. And we talked about the culture and the language and all of those aspects that are important in designing learning experiences. So great job, everyone. Thank you so much for today. We are actually at time. So any last minute words from anyone would be your closing. Bob, do you have any last word for us, Tracey? No? So thanks everyone again. Do be on the lookout for all the communications coming out. And again, thank you, Andrea, for hosting today, and we'll have this posted on our website by next week. Have a great rest of the week. Yes.
Thank you, Winston. I think Sophia wanted to say something.
Sophia, who is actually a friend of mine. Hi, Sophia.
Thank you very, very much, Winston, and the presenters. Fantastic. Thank you very, very much.
Great to see you, Sophia. All right. Have a great week, everyone.
Thank you, everyone. See you.
Thanks
a lot.
Tracy,
Bye.
Jianwei,
Bye.
Nancy,
Aloha.
wonderful talks. Thank you.
Aloha.